Hi ladies, Christina Drake, Growth Group Coordinator with Purposeful Living. We are on the Exodus series titled Be Brave. This is lesson 6 titled Will You Stand With Me? So as a quick summary from last week's lesson, we talked about how the Israelites left Egypt. They had victory over their oppressors, which were the Egyptians. And as no more than 3 days out, they started to get a little tough. There wasn't any water, there wasn't any food. They started grumbling and complaining, and the Lord took care of them. But he took care of them in a very interesting way. He rained down bread from heaven, and he also had quail come in, so they had meat and bread. But the Lord told them, only gather what you need for the day and depend on me to bring you the food for the next day. And some folks didn't obey God, and the food literally rotted. The extra that they grabbed for the next day rotted. And the Lord said, he put them in a position that every single day that they had to trust in him for their food. And that's a big thing. Sometimes you may trust in God for some far off thing or something in extravagance or excess. They had to trust them for their daily needs every single day. And that put them in a position that the Lord taught them to trust him on a daily basis. And so now, as they continue walking in the wilderness towards the promised land, they run across a king called Amalek, and that city referred to the Amalekites. It was very interesting, these people called Amalekites, because they were in battles all the time with people. But the interesting thing on the Amalekites, that as they were journeying out of Egypt, they met them along the road, and they attacked all of the stragglers from behind when they were tired and they're weary. So usually as they were progressing out towards battle, they always lined up all of the tribes by their strongest men or the armies going forward. So if they ran into someone, they'd be prepared to engage. But typically what you put in folks in the back were the ones that you needed to protect. If they were the elderly, if they were the sick, if they were tired, if they were weary, they weren't going out front. So what these people did in hate and is to really not go out and engage them and attack them from the front side, but came in from behind and attacked those who couldn't defend themselves or were exhausted or were tired. And that was such an evil hatred that they had for the people, unprovoked. And so when Moses said this, he said to Joshua, and he said, select some men for us and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the hilltop with God's staff in my hand. And we're in Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 16. And it's very interesting. The leader, Moses, when Joshua was out to battle, what he had to do was hold God's staff in his hands up in the air. And you could think about how long battles would take place. That could be days or it could be all day. Not just an hour, not just 15 minutes. But can you imagine holding your hand up with a wooden rod? And so, interesting thing, he said Joshua did as Moses had told him, and he fought against Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur, H-U-R, went up to the top of the hill. And while Moses held up his hand, Israel was winning the battle. But whenever he put his hands down and he was tired, Amalek was starting to win the battle. So when Moses' hands would grow very heavy and very tired, you think about holding up your hands for that long, how you would start very excited, your hands up, and then after a while, the heavier and heavier it would get, that your hands would start to drop and start to feel very, very heavy. And it said that when Moses' hands grew heavy, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat down on it. And then Aaron and Hur supported his hands. Very interesting to see that as the leader was getting tired, as when he was going through that and he's felt weary, Aaron on one side and Hur on the other hand supported, each one of them supported his hands. And it said supported his hands one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until the sun went down. And when this happened, when he had supporters that came and stood with him to help him, to hold his hands, said Joshua defeated Amalek and his army with the sword. So we think about situations today, and our nation is in a broken spot. Very, it's sad to see the state of hatred in our nation today. And this is a good parallel to that when we fight against evil, and it's not against people, but it is against a spirit of evil, a spirit of darkness in this world. And what Moses was doing is raising his hands to the Lord. And as we raise our hands together in prayer and in unity, having someone that's been in this battle for a long time, and they start to feel weary and heavy, can we be Aaron? Can we be a Hur that comes and stands next to Moses and steadies their hand, holds them up? Can we stand just like those did with Moses to win the battle? And so when we think about it, it's not a battle. The Bible tells us it's not a battle against flesh and blood, but it's against powers and darknesses in the heavenly realms. So these are age-old things that the Lord, that has been in this world, and it just manifests into different hatred and different people, but it's the same divisive hatred spirit that comes and tries to destroy. It tries to destroy the folks that are tired and they're weak, just as the Amalekites did along the way. There's no compassion there. It went for targeted destruction and hatred of people, and that was what that spirit was then. But the Lord even said that he remembers this. So back, and it said that the Lord will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. So it was not the people at the time, Amalek, because they defeated them, moved on, but it was that spirit of darkness, of evil, that the Lord would be a war against from generation to generation. And the way he described it, many generations later, when we talk about King Saul, which came right before King David in a timeline, and he said, remember what the Amalekites did to you on the journey after you left Egypt. They met you along the way and attacked all of your stragglers from behind when you were tired and weary. So they did not fear God. There's no respect or honor for God with that spirit of divisiveness, of hatred. And so going back to Moses and Aaron, in verse 14 of Exodus chapter 17, it said, the Lord said to Moses, write this down on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua, so that I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner. And he said, indeed, my hand is lifted up towards the Lord's throne. The Lord will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. And so we're thinking about what really is a banner, and what does that mean, that the Lord is my banner? So a banner was something that people can identify with, unifies a particular group of people, or it could be thought, when the Israelites were saying the Lord is my banner, it was a way of identifying themselves as unified followers of the Lord. And it also, banner functions as like a rallying point for troops in a battle. So at the altar Moses built in Exodus 17, he marked the place where God intervened on behalf of his people, how he protected them, and he promised to utterly defeat his enemies. And so sometimes when we feel like we are alone in this, we have supporters that will come stand with us, and we'll stand with those that are struggling, that are hurting, that are tired and weary. And that when the Lord wins this battle, because it's not a battle against people, but it's a battle against the darkness of hatred, he said that our banner that we lift up, our banner is identifying that we are his, though, and what signifies, and it says his banner over us is love. So when you identify with God, that love is the opposite of hate. And that you will see, and he said, you will know them by their fruits. When you see love, then you will see my people. But it's really important what the Lord said to Moses. And he said, write this down on a scroll and recite it to Joshua. And so in 1 Corinthians 15:57, in the New Testament, it talks about, but thanks to God, he gives us victory through Jesus. And one of my favorite scriptures in Jeremiah 6:16, it says, stand in the ways and see and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is and walk in it. And it's so rich in that. And it says, open your eyes, stand and see. And one of the things that we can think about when we think about Moses and what he was on a good fight for the Lord, but he was tired and he was weary. And how wonderful was it with someone to stand and help Moses when he was weary and to stand with him? And how wonderful is it to open our eyes and to see with eyes of love and compassion how we can stand with others that are tired and weary. And one of the things about the Lord always says, remember, because through the love of Jesus, you'll be victorious. And in Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 15, it says, for my people have forgotten me. They've burned incense to worthless gods, and they have stumbled from their ways, from the ancient paths, to walk in byways and not on a highway. So where does it all start? It says, my people have forgotten me. And so it is so important that when we have a victory, because there will come another bump or another struggle or another trial, is to write this down. Lord specifically told Moses to write this down and recite it to Joshua, to the next generation, about how I would be victorious and how that he was going to completely blot out the name of the enemy. He was going to be victorious against hatred. He was going to be victorious. And it's through the love of Jesus that we are able to be victorious. And we have to believe. We have to believe that he is for us and that his love is the answer. So ladies, have a great day.